Last week, from February 20th to 24th, 2025, North Korea briefly reopened to Western tourists for the first time in more than 5 years. Just 13 visitors were allowed into the country, all of them foreigners. So what was that like, and why have they only let in so few people? Well, it turns out there's a pretty bizarre history to tourism in North Korea, and while the country does want to make money from visitors, they also have good reasons to keep their country largely shut off from the outside world. Before we get into it though, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And now let's get into the video. Tourism to North Korea is about as unusual as you might expect. While the Hermit Kingdom has eased some of its draconian rules in recent years, particularly surrounding media consumption, there are still a lot of restrictions placed on anyone wanting to visit. For example, even after announcing it would begin accepting tourists again in January 2025, a month before the first group arrived, it had not yet issued any visas. Despite this, the tourists who did eventually arrive were treated to a carefully curated tour of the country, staying only in state-approved hotels, only visiting places the government approves of, and never being permitted to talk to locals without permission. But while the last-minute nature of the tours and the restrictions imposed on the tourists may sound off-putting, these are actually fairly normal things when it comes to tourism in North Korea. After all, tourism is one of the few ways that ordinary citizens of North Korea can interact with foreigners, so the government wants to ensure that those interactions go smoothly. It's also worth noting that while the tours are highly curated and restricted, they do offer an incredible look into one of the most secretive countries in the world. Some of the sites that the tourists visited last week included the Arch of Reunification, the Jukki Tower, the Moranbong Theater, the Pyongyang Ice Rink, and the Yeonggukdo International Hotel. They also reportedly attended a performance of the Mansudae art troupe. This is an elite group of performers that exists to entertain visiting dignitaries and foreign tourists. They are not allowed to perform for North Koreans themselves. And while seeing these sights is certainly interesting, the real draw of North Korea for many tourists is the chance to cross the border and see what life is like for ordinary North Koreans. In spite of the tightly controlled tours, some say that they learned a lot from their trips to the country, but these days it's not very easy to visit at all. In fact, since 2020, no foreigner has been able to visit the country except for a handful of journalists and diplomats. That's because on January 21st, 2020, just before the virus hit South Korea, North Korea sealed its borders completely. They became the first country in the world to do so. The closure of its borders was widely seen as an effort to prevent the spread of COVID-19, but it also intensified North Korea's long-standing isolationist policies. But why was North Korea so eager to seal its borders in the first place? Well, as mentioned earlier, tourists aren't allowed to use North Korean currency when visiting. They instead must use either US dollars or Chinese yuan. This means that every single tourist who visits North Korea injects some amount of foreign currency into the economy. So even though tourism is obviously good for North Korea's economy, the government is always worried that it will lose too much control over the influx of cash. In the early 2000s, North Korea identified tourism as a potential source of income and began actively promoting itself as a tourist destination. The country's government hoped to attract 2 million visitors by 2010, but that target was never met. Between 1998 and 2008, North Korea's most successful tourism initiative was the Mount Kung Resort area. This ski resort located close to the border with South Korea attracted nearly 2 million South Korean tourists. However, the boom came to an abrupt end in July 2008, when a South Korean tourist was shot dead after illegally crossing a border fence. The incident resulted in a sharp decline in foreign visitors, and the government became much more cautious about issuing visas. After the Mount Kung Resort closed, North Korea's tourism industry struggled. The country only attracted a trickle of visitors, most of whom were Chinese. The situation changed slightly in 2014 when the government began issuing visas on arrival to Chinese tourists. This led to a small increase in tourism numbers, but it was nothing compared to the glory days of the Mount Kun. Even today, the vast majority of tourists who visit North Korea are Chinese. Very few come from other countries. But why don't more people visit? Well, as we alluded to earlier, North Korea's government is extremely sensitive about how its country is perceived by outsiders. As such, it has implemented a number of policies designed to prevent negative media coverage. One of these policies is a ban on independent travel. All tourists must be accompanied by government-pointed guides at all times. There are also strict rules governing what tourists can and cannot photograph. For example, it is forbidden to take pictures of anything related to the military, including tanks, soldiers, and even flags. Tourists are also not allowed to take pictures of anything that could be construed as critical of the government, such as poverty or squalor. Any tourist found violating these rules can be expelled from the country and banned from re-entry. Additionally, North Korea's government is extremely sensitive about anything that could be perceived as a threat to national security. As such, tourists are not allowed to bring in any items that could potentially be used as weapons, such as knives, firearms, and even scissors. Another reason for the lack of tourism is North Korea's government attitude towards its own people. The regime views its citizens as inferior and does not believe that they are capable of interacting with foreigners without supervision. As such, tourists are not allowed to interact with North Koreans unless they are part of an official government's sanctioned tour group. This is not only frustrating for tourists who want to experience the country and its people, but it also creates a sense of unease and paranoia. After all, you can't help but wonder if you're being watched, and if so, what are your guides reporting back to the authorities? It should also be said that traveling to North Korea is expensive. The government requires all tourists to purchase a special visa that costs at least $500. On top of that, tourists must also pay for a tour guide and a translator, which can cost several $1,000s depending on the length of the stay. This is obviously a major barrier to entry for many people who simply can't afford it. So those are the reasons why North Korea doesn't receive more tourists. While the country has a lot to offer visitors, its government attitude towards both tourists and its own people creates a very unpleasant and uninviting atmosphere. If that changes, it's likely that more people will want to visit, but until then, North Korea will remain one of the least visited countries in the world. So do you think you'd ever visit North Korea? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.